It begins before dawn, when the airy school and great river has not yet woken fully from its nightly slumber. The silence is profound, but it is not empty. It is a silence of immense pressure, a palpable tension that precedes the storm's roar. You feel it first on the back of your neck, a subtle mineral dryness, a whisper of grit so fine it seemed to be merely a lack of moisture in the air. The mud brick village remains deep in shadow. The thick walls, holding the previous day's stored heat and sealing in the night's cool air. A single oil lamp flickers behind a high narrow window, its small flame trembling not from an immediate draft, but from the immense quiet mass of air shifting miles away from the Libyan plateau. The dogs are restless, shifting on the packed earth, their ears twitching in response to a sound the human ear cannot yet fully register. The sound of geological movement, a colossal inhalation before the desert's sudden, violent exhalation. Then, an unsettling visual cue. The eastern sky, instead of blooming with the clean gold of sunrise, is stained with the muddied pale orange haze, faint as an old bruise. They know, before the official light of the capsim, the 50-day wind is upon them. The day will be the day of profound withdrawal, a day when the outside world transforms from breathable air into a choking, grinding adversary. The quiet is fragile, deceptive membrane. It is the deep, shared breath taken just before the village must seal itself against the coming elemental fury. The village's first essential defense against the abrasive, relentless advance of the desert wind was a simple, yet profoundly collective act. The closing of the wooden shutters. This sound, echoing throughout the small community, was a series of low, firm thuds, the first auditory signal of the town's retreat. The homes, built of sun-baked mud brick and designed with specific placement to catch the prevailing north wind for cooling, were instantly transformed into sealed defensive citadels when the Kamsim approached. These shutters were not elaborate structures, but thick, simple planks of locally sourced wood, such as tamarisk or acacia, secured with heavy crossbars or pegs driven into the surrounding brickwork. The movement was swift and decisive, performed the moment the wind's character shifted, the moment the air lost its clarity and began to feel heavy with suspended particles. Fathers, mothers, and older children moved in synchronized haste to seal every vulnerable opening. The small high windows, which served more for ventilation and diffusion of light than for outward viewing, were the most critical points. The shutter ceremony was an act of communal foresight and shared commitment. It was not merely about blocking the wind's power. It was about protecting the precious breathable interior atmosphere of the dwelling. Once sealed, the light inside underwent a fundamental transformation, shifting from direct, harsh brightness of the outside world to a deep, filtered ember of sepia glow. Illumination was maintained mostly by carefully angled air vents, designed to disrupt the direct entry of dust, or by the measured gentle flame of an oil lamp placed high on a shelf. The resultant darkness was a tangible form of protection, a soft, quiet stillness where the family could wait out the hours of the storm. The monumental thickness of the mud brick walls absorbed the sound, turning the wind's shriek into a low, distant hum. This ritual, performed in unison across the community, was the first signal of the village's collective surrender to, and simultaneous mastery over, the desert's overwhelming power. When the external world sealed off by wood and brick, the next level of defense was purely personal, centered around a single most vital element: air and breath. The Egyptians understood that even the best sealed mud brick dwelling was never entirely impermeable. The desert dust was too pervasive, too fine, capable of penetrating the smallest fissure or crack. The immediate crucial act that followed the closing of the shutters was to take a piece of linen, often a simple strip torn from an old soft garment or a carefully preserved shawl, and wrap the mouth and nose in a close-fitting, protective layer. This was not a panicked action, but a deliberate, almost meditative practice of self-preservation. The cloth was intended to be the final, most intimate filter, catching the microscopic silica particles that the house structure failed to block. This simple linen mask became a temporary, artificial lung, a small local atmosphere that made continuous breathing possible without the terrible, grinding irritation in the throat and sinuses. The cloth was sometimes slightly damped with a few drops of precious stored water, a careful, precise application of moisture, which made the barrier more effective at tapping dust and provided a momentary sense of coolness and humidity to the arid air. This practice was deeply intertwined with the Egyptian understanding of the breath or ba as a vital spiritual force. To protect the breath was to guard the very core of one's life force and spiritual energy. Even the most humble farmer possessed this deep survival wisdom. Clean, deep breathing was the key to enduring the storm's duration. The slight firm pressure of the cloth against the face served as a constant, tactile reminder of the external threat and interior vulnerability, encouraging a shallower, more measured, and slower pace of activity. Movement inside the sealed house was reduced to an economy of quiet effort, conserving the quality of the air in the room and the energy of the body until the moment the wind finally spent its fury. The Kamsim was never merely a cloud of dust. It was a physical, kinetic force, a brutal, grinding adversary that threatened the very structural integrity of the home. The most vulnerable point, apart from the doors and windows, was the flat-backed earth roof. While these roofs were essential, offering a cool, breezy sleeping area during the summer nights, they represented a significant weakness during a fierce windstorm, prone to having their layers of matting and earth stripped away. The ingenious Egyptian solution was a testament to their deep knowledge of their environment. The securing of the roofs with carefully placed stones. This was an act of structural prevention, requiring immense timing, judgment, and collective speed. The moment the warning signs appeared, families scrambled to the roof before the worst of the squall hit. The stones used were not massive blocks of masonry, which would require excessive effort to lift and position. Instead, they were typically smaller, river-smoothed cobbles or leftover fragments of brick and stone, collected and consciously stored for this specific seasonal purpose. The ritual involved the family carrying these weights up and distributing them across the roof's surface. The weight of the stones applied the necessary counter-pressure to the layer-freed matting and packed earth, preventing the wind from finding a weak point, lifting the material, and catastrophically tearing the roof structure apart. This ritual spoke volumes about foresight. It was a seasonal chore, a constant annual reminder that the desert was an entity that demanded respect, preparation, and ceaseless vigilance. Even the animals had their ways, retreating instinctively into the most structurally sound corners of the enclosed courtyards or thick, covered pens, sensing the danger to the shelter above. The act of securing the roof emphasized that the survival was not a matter of reacting to a sudden crisis, but of living a life perpetually ready for the next environmental challenge. The stones, silent and inanimate, were the village's heavy-duty anchors against the vast, immaterial rage of the sky. They demonstrated an ancient, profound knowledge of how to apply simple, manageable weights to counter the destructive power of a colossal, natural force, protecting the safety and sanctity of the dwelling until the storm's energy was spent. Once the world was sealed, shutters closed, mouths wrapped, and roofs secured, the family entered a state of enforced interiority. The air, though still holding the grit, was now relatively motionless, and the overwhelming sensory experience became one of the profound sonic and visual transformation. Outside, the world was a cacophony of shrieking wind and grinding sand, a violent roar. Inside, this was reduced to a low continuous humming, resonance within the thick walls. More striking was the watching of the light change, with the sun completely obscured by hundreds of miles of dust. The interior illumination shifted dramatically from the sharp clarity of the day to a suffocating, almost oppressive amber red gloom. This was not the gentle shadow of the evening. It was a false, heavy midday darkness. Light, when it entered at all, was diffused through the small, carefully angled air vents or glowed faintly from the single oil lamp. The walls themselves seemed to absorb all color, rendering everything into shades of sepia and burned amber. This unnatural lighting has a psychological effect. It distorted the sense of time, making the hours stretch into an indeterminate duration of waiting. Even the children learned their rhythms, knowing that the day was now marked not by the sun's position, but by the relentless sound of the wind's voice outside. In this enclosed darkness, family life took on a quiet, hushed quality. They moved slowly, conserving the air and their energy, speaking in low tones. The texture of the air, once sealed, began to change again, becoming slightly warmer and drier, yet also heavier with the collective breath and the slow, inevitable penetration of the finest dust. People would occasionally move closer to the oil lamp, holding their palms near the flame to feel the only source of pure light, a small, trembling resistance against the gloom. This time of waiting became a period of inner reflection, of quiet storytelling, or of a simply sitting, listening to the desert rage and trusting the strength of the walls and the security of the stones above their heads. The watching of the light change was, therefore, not a passive observation. It was an active exercise in patience and faith, an understanding that the natural order of light would eventually return, signaling the retreat of chaos. They waited for the moment when the oppressive red began to lighten, when a faint purer yellow might penetrate the mark, whispering a promise of the storm's passing. The long, agonizing hours of the storm's peak eventually gave way to a subtle lessening of the roar. And the light, though still sepia-toned, began to ease its oppressive hold. This was the moment for the next essential ritual: personal restoration, beginning with the rinsing of eyes with care. The eyes were the most vulnerable organ to the relentless microscopic grit. Hours of exposure, even though cloth-wrapped faces, left them burning, swollen, and firm with a painful mixture of tears and sand. To neglect this step was to risk permanent damage, pain, and infection. This act was treated with the same meticulous, water-conserving precision as the morning bath. The water used for this purpose was drawn from the deepest, most protective clay jars, stored specifically to remain cool and clean. It was precious, and its use was highly controlled. They did not splash their faces carelessly. Instead, a small amount, a thimbleful, perhaps, or a delicate pour from a spout, was collected in the concave palm of one hand. The head was tilted back, and the water was gently allowed to stream into the open eye, or the eye was lowered directly into the small pool held in the hand. The movement was slow, deliberate, and repeated, one eye at a time. The water was not meant to flood the face, but to gently lift and carry away the irritating particles from the delicate membrane of the eye itself. This ritual was often performed by family members for one another, a parent rinsing a child's eyes, a spouse tending to their partner, because the discomfort made precise, steady self-pouring difficult. It was an act of profound tender care, a temporary return to intimacy after the collective siege of the storm. They understood that the desert's patience was longer than their own. The act of cleansing the eyes was also a psychological release. To open the eyes and see the world, even the darkened, dusty interior, without the grinding irritation of sand was the first true physical comfort after the storm. Even the children learned their rhythms, understanding the immense relief of clear vision and the importance of conserving the precious cool rinse water. The residue, cloudy with dust, was often poured into the threshold or courtyard plant. Nothing was wasted. The eyes, clear again, were the first part of the body to fully emerge from the storm's imprisonment, prepared for the final necessary task. The great roar finally begins to soften, giving way to a vast, slow exhalation. The shrieking insistence that defied the day recedes into a low, mournful sigh. The dust itself still suspended, losing its dynamic fury. It simply hangs, heavy and resigned, a deep, pervasive haze. Slowly, the first cautious movements begin. The heavy crossbars are lifted, and the wooden shutters are pushed open just a crack. Not a wide, welcoming opening, but a narrow slit through which the first tentative, cool air of the post-storm night is admitted. Through the thinning haze, the night sky begins to emerge, the ancient, steady stars starting to pierce the veil above the ridge. The final, essential ritual of the day begins. Sweeping before sleep, no one lies down until the most abrasive, intrusive dust had been addressed. The thick, silty drifts that have piled up inside the doorway, the fine coating on the sleeping mats, the layer covering the cooking implements, all must be managed, using simple, short-handled brooms made of bundled reeds or twigs. The family works quietly in the soft light of the oil lamp, It is sound of gentle, rhythmic rasping on the packed earth floors, a sound of restoration and assertion of order over the chaos of the day. The earth is not carelessly tossed out into the wind again. It is gathered respectfully into small, manageable heaps. It is a part of the earth after all, and is safe to be added to the compost or mixed into the slurry for brick making later. This cleaning is a process of both physical and mental purification. It is the action that closes the account of the difficult day, ensuring that they do not lie down in the very grit that sought to defeat them. The lamps are trimmed, the bedding is shaken and smoothed, and the sound of the small broom slowly ceases. The dogs settle down with long sighs of relief, their instincts satisfied that the threat has passed. The village breathes deeply and slowly. The air is cool now, clean enough. The final profound stillness returns, carrying the scent of cool earth and the promise of the stars. From the first subtle whisper of grit to the final scraping of the reed broom, that was the essential rhythm of endurance. It began with the closure of the wooden shutters, a collective seal against chaos. It was secured by the cloth wrapped tight around the mouth, guarding the most precious resource, the breath. It was anchored by the stones placed on the roof, asserting structure over storm. It was endured by watching the light change, trusting that true daylight would return. It was healed by rinsing the eyes with care, restoring vision and comfort, and it ended with sweeping before sleep, an affirmation of order and peace. The lamps grow dim, the final embers in the cooking fire turn to gray. The river is still, a mirror of the steady stars. The heavy, sealed doors of the mud brick home stand sentinel. The village sleeps deeply and without dream, recovering from the long siege. The rhythm is complete, and now you are at rest.